I don't need to do a hard opening, do I? Of kind of, hello, welcome to. I'm just going to start off by, because I found the whole Craftivist movement so fascinating. It was, we first met, it was probably about 10 years ago, isn't it? It's a long time back. And it was my friend Josie Long, and hopefully people watching this and people out there are aware of Josie. Josie is a comedian and an author and someone that I've known since she was, I think, 18 years old. And we've worked together a lot. Yeah, I was only 25 and she used to call me old man. And now she's 42. Don't think I let that lie. But Josie is this, you know, the moment she mentioned your work, I was fascinated. And you came on our podcast, Book Shambles podcast, because Josie is one of those people who, she doesn't just do stand-up comedy. If she's going to do a show, she will create the most wonderful banners, like the kind of banners you would have seen at Greenham Common during the protests, things like that. She has homemade T-shirts. She makes comic strips. She is just that perfect thing, which I think that you achieve, which is, so many people, I think, are brimful of creativity, but feel that they can't express it. And I think what the Craftivist movement, I think, is very, certainly people I've spoken to in the past about it, is it gives you the keys to say, look, you are allowed to fail. It may not look beautiful. It may not look how you know. I think one of the greatest battles in anything that is creative is there's a beautiful moment in a film called The Horse's Mouth, about an artist called Gully Jimpson. And he spends months making this enormous mural of people's feet. And at the end, he just looks at it for a moment and almost smiles and then says, oh, but why doesn't it look like it does in here? Yeah. And I think that is one of the... So let's start off, first of all, in fact, even before we get to the book, because obviously you've got a new book and it is a very practical, it does that great thing. It is both practical and beautiful, so it fits in all the William Morris kind of world. But in terms of when did you really get the sense of, before this was a movement, of the power that you found as someone who, you know, is generally, you know, you shy, you would just, I think you're right, you would describe yourself as an introvert, would you?
100%, yeah.
So finding that, you know, what was the first time that you started to think, hang on a minute, this has come out from here and now it's made?
Oh, I mean, I had an epiphany on a train to Glasgow. So it was very specific for me of picking up a cross-stitch kit to go on a 5-hour train journey from London to Glasgow. I was working for DFID at the time, the UK Department for International Development, and I was burning out in my job, which was to help with public engagement around social change, reaching new audiences, and my personal life, which was joining lots of activist groups because I'd moved to London for the role. And I was exhausted. I didn't know I was an introvert. That helped massively a few years later, figuring that out. But I knew on a Pendolino train to Glasgow, I'd feel travel sick and too sick to do my emails, write my reports, do the reading. And I'd missed using my hands, and I knew I couldn't paint watercolours on the train because it would be a mess. So I weirdly was in a little shop and there was a £5 cross-stitch of a teddy, which I didn't think was very interesting, but it was cheap enough. And I'd never done cross-stitch before, but one of the joys of craft is that it looks easy and accessible. So I was like, well, okay, I'll just do this. I miss using my hands. I'm not good at sleeping on travel, but I'm knackered. And I just thought, it's just going to pass the time. But then as soon as I started separating my thread, it made me mindful of how shaky my hands were, how tight my shoulders were, how shallow my breath was, which in 2008 this was, no activist group that I'd joined from the age of 11 to that age of 20-something. At that time, we'd never go, are people okay? How's your well-being? Are you burnt out? It wasn't a thing. And in activist groups, you didn't notice. You weren't told to, like, how are you doing? So it's the first time I thought, oh my word, I'm burning out. In my professional job as an activist, can I be an activist, or why am I burning out? I'm really passionate. I don't get it. And the process of crafting and then doing those little crosses, before I was doing the cross-stitch kit, I would have those thoughts of, can I be an activist? Am I being effective? I don't think I am. I can't find another way. And I'd go on a downward spiral, and then I'd think about something else. Whereas sitting on a train doing these crosses, it was the only time I felt safe and comfortable enough with doing this repetitive hand action and physically seeing that I'm not completely incompetent because I'm doing these crosses. It made me be able to sit with that scary question of, can I even do this? Do I believe in activism anymore? Can I be an activist? If I have to get another job, I'm not really employable for anything apart from campaigning. It gave me the comfort of craft to ask those uncomfortable questions. And then people opposite me were like, what are you doing? And I thought, oh my word, imagine if you did activism that intrigued people enough to ask the question so they weren't forced a view on, but you would say, oh, this is what I'm doing. So I thought, you know, the activist in me was like, oh, if only I was cross-stitching a quote by Gandhi about inequality, we could talk about it. I was cross-stitching a teddy. But that thought with the Macon thought, and then literally on the train, I came up with the mini protest banner idea, the postcard banners. It just all sort of unraveled in my head of like, this could be a thing. So I Googled craft and activism, and the word existed, but there wasn't any projects or groups I could join. And it was much more about knitting and how it was activism with a small a, politics with a small p, of make, do and mend and community. But there wasn't any specific protest or activism things I could do. So I emailed Betsy Greer, who coined the term in 2003, and said, I think there's something in this for me as my background in activism, not in craft. Can I use the word? And set up my Lonely Craftivist blog, which is the most emo thing I've ever done in my entire life. I'm a lonely craftivist. Why aren't there other people like me burning out? And why can't we do cute, intriguing activism? And started putting up little mini banners. But it was that train to Glasgow where it just clicked. And it just felt like this gut feeling of, oh, this could work. But for me, it was very selfishly, if this could help me. I never had in my head, I think as an introvert as well, like this isn't now a movement and I will set up a group and support. I was just thinking this will help me do something. I can do it anonymously. I can do it on my own in my bedroom or on the train. So in one way, I think I wouldn't do it if I knew it was going to become a bigger thing. No offense to the people in the room. I was very much just like, yeah, I wasn't thinking about mobilizing. I was thinking about those intimate one-to-one conversations and the anonymous activism stuff. The introvert in me was like, this helps with the introversion, not realizing it would end up like this, which is brilliant.
Danbee, what was your first experience? Because obviously, you know, you're involved in this book in a very, you know, the science is where it comes in here. But when did you first know about both? Well, I'd like to know both, if I can ask you a little bit of backstory, both about activism and craft before we get onto the neuroscience.
Well, okay, so I never really, I just assumed that activism wasn't for me because, I was just like, ugh, big crowds, and I don't like that kind of environment. But as a scientist, I had a lot of strong opinions about how scientific research was being done, how science was being communicated, and I similarly was just like, I need to do something to make sure I don't burn out. And so I met Sarah in the middle of my PhD, which I had started by, I was super burned out as an undergraduate and vowed never to go back to academia again. And then a few years later, I found myself back in academia, but I had decided, okay, I'm going to go in with some clear boundaries for myself. One of them being, I'm not going to do any invasive work. I'm not going to do like surgeries that are going to kill animals. In order to justify, because I got a lot of concern from my professors saying like, oh, you'll never make it in neuroscience if you're not willing to do these invasive surgeries, if you're not willing to do, practice these techniques that require killing 30 animals a week. They're just like, oh, you're just never going to make it. And so to justify the way that I wanted to do science, I was really reaching out to people in other areas of expertise to say, okay, well, if I'm trying to study the brain, actually there are a lot of other professions that their work requires sort of creating a model in their own head of how other people's brains work, and then making some, artistic choices to engage other people's minds, other people's brains. And one of the first people I ran into and had this chat with was who turned out, we met while both having lunch outside in one of these little corner parks in Fitzrovia. And I sort of started talking about neuroscience because we were just outside of the research building, and he was like, oh, I'm a visual effects designer. And I was like, brilliant. Here's a great example of someone who has to understand how other people perceive the world and then make some artistic choices. So we started talking about that. And that's how I met Sarah, because Matt was like, hold on, there's someone you really have to meet. And actually that conversation with Matt also jump-started one of my major projects, which is Dear Neuroscience. And that is where, and we sort of spoke about this before, how neuroscience is sort of held up on this pedestal as the new progressive god of oh, if neuroscience says this, then it must be true, and it's irrefutable. And I was just like, oh, but that feels really counterproductive as a scientist. But then also, yeah, everybody has a brain, everyone uses it every day, and there are many insights from people's lived experiences that never get into these academic papers, never get considered when we're designing experiments. So I want to create a space and a channel of communication where people can just say, and it's definitely it's playing on the Dear Abby, agony aunt style thing, where it's like, Dear Neuroscience, I have this burning question about my brain, about psychology, about behavior. I have no idea if neuroscientists are studying this, or but I'm very curious. This is what I'm genuinely curious about. And so that was me trying to say, hey, if we are a publicly funded research institute, shouldn't we be researching things that the public are interested in? And so maybe there should be an open channel to have conversations about what people are actually interested in.
And then I went, can you please do this? And locked them in a room and signed them up.
Yeah. So yeah, that's how.
Can I pick up? I want to get back to a lot of the things brought up there, but one of the things you said there was about perception and visual effects and perception. And I think that's one that, we were talking before we started filming this about the fact that there is, in science and in many other areas, including news media and social media and all those things, this is the normal. Yeah. This is the way things are meant to be. And of course, what you can get from art is that beautiful thing where you see what someone else has experienced. So when you see a truly beautiful painting, whether it's the work of Louise Bourgeois, whether it's the work of Turner or whatever it might be, you are going, well, this is how they are sensing this. It's not just this is what it looks like. It's there. And that seems to be a very important part of giving people the tools through craft. So people who might go, I will never be able to paint, not even just when they're on the Pendolino, generally they might not feel like, but that bit of going, this has come from my mind and this is kind of what I'm seeing. And now I have a physical, I hope this makes sense, but a physical expression of what lies in here.
Well, I mean, I always say my Craftivism, because Craftivism, I didn't coin the word, so I always say it's like punk music. You've got all these different bands, so I call ours Gentle Protest Craftivism or Gentle Craftivism. For me, it's not art activism, and it's that balance and active. I love art for your reasons. You see it and then you respond however you want, and I love that about art. I think with activism, we've got to be a bit more prescriptive of this is the issue, and then these are the questions around it, and who are the decision makers, and what role can I have with it. So it's not about preaching in your protest with Craftivism, but it is more than putting it's like our mini banners, which was the first project I did, which is in the book. It's still the most popular, I think, because people want to express their concerns and anger and sadness and put it out into the world. But I always say to people, okay, what's the issue you care about? What's the solution? Who are the power holders? Where's the best place for you to hang your mini banner? Is the message too ambiguous? Don't turn it into a scary statement, but you can turn it into a question where it's still clear what it is. If it's about sweatshops, you hang it near a shopping centre or a fast fashion place. I did one near the Treasury. All of that stuff, it's more design activism than just creative expression of your concerns. It's more working backwards in a way, which can piss people off, and particularly artists going, oh, but I really want to express my view in craft. And I'm like, try and work backwards of what's that utopia vision, what's the problem you care about, and then is this the tool to serve that cause, which is why I love the word craft more than, there's lots of art activism out there or political art. I love the word craft because for me it's, I always say it's craftivism, see it like a chair. You can have a really beautiful wobbly chair that you sit on and it falls apart. It's made really unethically, people aren't paid well, all of that stuff. And you can have a really sustainable, ethical chair that lasts longer than your life. Both of them are chairs, but I know the one that I want to buy or sit in. And I think for me, that's always, with the book, it's always one of the reasons for the neuroscience in it really is to say, great that you might want to cross-stitch, crochet a teddy, crochet a voodoo doll of a particular world leader. They are out in the world. They get more likes on Instagram than my work for obvious reasons. It's fun. People can like it straight away. But for me, it's more harmful than helpful. You're focused on personality, not policy. It's more divisive. And my gut feeling was, I don't think that's effective. And then talking to Danbee, reading about psychology and neuroscience, going, okay, if I was someone who voted for that particular power holder, of course I'm going to feel even more excluded. Or if I am that power holder, I will never want to meet that person and have a conversation with them who's just done a crocheted pattern of me with pins all over me. So it's always bringing it back to how can the craft serve the cause and not be the taskmaster. I don't know if that answers your question, and I'm just rambling, Robin.
That's all right. My question was very long, and I don't know what I was asking you either. Okay. So it's worked out very well. I start off saying, but no, I think it has. I mean,
and I think hearing from Danbee about the neuroscience of, okay, well, that actually does make sense, and we know the evidence behind this. And I go, okay, so it wasn't just my gut feeling. This does seem to, like, I didn't know about good surprises and the dopamine effect and all of that. And then, so some of the stuff I did, some of the neuroscience backed it up. And then other stuff, I'd hear the neuroscience and go, how can I fit that into the craftivism? And I really wanted the neuroscience in the book for the skeptics, for the people to go, oh, well, this is just nice and hippie, to be like, this is actually how the brain works. Don't dismiss it. And Danbee's done a brilliant job at that.
Nearly everything that's positive is dismissed as being somehow hippie. It's like when people
And I think as a woman as well, and you're also talking about craft, there's a lot of ways for people discredit, And I wanted to be like, this isn't just a nice thing to do, this actually is strategic. And the craft isn't because I love craft. I like craft for activism and I like making gifts for people. But I also, I think our intentions shouldn't be, I love craft, I'm going to use it for good. Your intention should be, how can I serve the injustice? And then where can craft get involved? And I think, my hope is that I think the neuroscience is a bit of a gentle protest for us to check in with our intentions and check in with, is this strategic? Or do I love neon pink so much that I'm putting it in everything? Is that helpful for the craftivism? It is. If the power holder always wears neon pink, they might love it. Or you're going to be at a certain fashion show where it is all about that trend. But sometimes it's honing in your own loves and going, okay, I'll do the neon pink thing for me in my room, but for this project, we won't use neon pink.
So dopamine, because that's come up there. So people love hearing about dopamine. So the dopamine of craft, Danbee, what do we know about that in terms of the hit that you can get? What are the general, from what we currently know about neuroscience, when something beautiful is being made and something which also is approaching an idea and a perhaps politicized idea, what are the positives that might be going on in the brain?
Okay, so I do want to start with a caveat of a lot of this is considered like emerging research in neuroscience because, speaking of skeptics, in the scientific world, if something is younger than 20 years, then it's sort of like, oh no, that's just emerging research. But sorry, I'll get off this soapbox in just a second, but I do want to point out that it was only in 1993 that it was required that drugs be tested in women before they were approved for clinical use. So I just want to point out, 20 years ago, we just barely got that. So yeah, but dopamine. So it does seem that, whenever we experience something positive, generally speaking, that produces more dopamine in our bodies, and that encourages us to feel like enthusiasm and motivation. And when you get an unexpected positive experience, so it's one thing to be like, oh, I am making my favorite meal, I'm following the recipe, I'm getting really excited and anticipating that deliciousness at the end. That will give you a nice increase in dopamine throughout the evening. However, if someone just shows up with your favorite meal already made for you and says, hey, I know you've been going through a really tough time, I brought you this thing, and you were not expecting it, that gives you an order of magnitude more, just a huge burst of dopamine activity in your brain. And it not only makes you feel good, which, tells you, it's sort of this like story you can tell yourself of, oh, I felt really good when I did this thing, so I might want to repeat that again. That's literally what that signal is there for. But it's not just feeling good, it's actually, that is an indicator that whatever chemicals your body is creating, it's actually healing and regrowing the cells in your body. And so when you were saying earlier, oh, this is just feel-good stuff, actually what we're finding, and I would say in a lot of ways neuroscience is catching up in terms of a lot of these experiences that we have in the real world as opposed to these artificial situations that we can set up in a lab. What we're realizing is a lot of these positive feelings that we're having, they're actually our best indicator for activity at the cellular level that is good and healthy for us. It's regenerating our cells. It's healing, our tissue. It's, it's doing these things that we don't really have a way of looking, like I can't look into my arm and go, oh, how are my nerves doing, right? Like we still don't even have that kind of imaging technology. However, what we're finding is when we feel positive emotions like enthusiasm, motivation, gratitude, pleasure when you're eating your favorite dish, or, the feeling of like family being together, all those positive emotions are actually our best indicators in our everyday lives for molecular cellular activity that is good for us.
That's fantastic. I wanted to also go a little bit further into gentle craftivism as well, which is something that you discuss in the book.
What it is?
Yeah, just to give a greater sense of gentle craftivism.
Yeah, so when I started doing Craftivism, it was mostly knitting groups and people knitting around lampposts or bridges in Brooklyn. And even the woman who started Yarn Bombing in Brooklyn said this isn't Craftivism. So it was quite a confusing world once I Googled Craftivism. Well, what is it? What isn't it? And because my background is activism and I'm a big geek on activism, I was always like, what's the strategy and what change are they trying to happen? Is it behavior or culture or policy or laws or all of that stuff? So when people kept saying like, what is craftivism? I didn't coin the word. So I didn't want people to think I did, and I didn't want to suppress other people's views and expressions of what it is. But it took me, I think, about 4 or 5 years to come up with this phrase of gentle protest. I was offered a solo show in Stockholm in their version of the Craft Council for a few months, which I loved. And I had to come up with a name for it. And all of my objects are small, most of them in the book, or the installations might be bigger, but they're of small things. And I kept thinking, what is it that's different about my work to some of the forms of craftivism out there? Not as an ego thing, but just, again, to say some craftivism isn't loving, it can be hateful, can be divisive, and I don't do that. So trying to separate a little bit. And people kept saying, Sarah created craftivism, and I'd have to be like, no, I didn't. So for me, it was important to sort of differentiate what it was. So activism, I feel a bit like now it's like the word sustainability. It's so broad and people use it so much, it can feel so big. Activism people are using much more for everything from awareness raising to donations, and so I used protest because that felt very clear. We're protesting against something but for something as well. So very narrow, that it's not just awareness raising, it's not donating or fundraising. But the word gentle, I just kept hearing it. I love reading Martin Luther King's sermons and lectures. I've got one of his books that's well thumbed that I read through because he's so emotionally intelligent and talks a lot about different philosophies as well and different religions. And he talked about a tough mind and a tender heart. And I thought, oh, tender's a lovely word. And Gandhi talks about you can shape the world in a gentle way. So I felt like if it was loving activism or loving protest, again, it was still a bit vague. So I kept saying the word gentle and people were like, oh yeah, gentle, because it's not passive or weak, but it is considered, it's compassionate, it's gentle for the maker, so you're not burning out, you're slowly doing stuff that's thoughtful and not reactive but proactive, and it's gentle for the power holder if you're giving a gift to a power holder, so it's respectful, but it is holding them account. So it felt like a really rich word. Gentle just fitted so well. So yeah, I always say our approach to craftivism is called gentle protest, and it just felt like it encompassed it really, really well. And I think there's other ways to do gentle protest that aren't craft, but I feel like the craftivism that I've done over the 16 plus years, the most effective and strategic, the most impactful it's been, is that invisible golden thread of gentleness. There will be lots of craft puns, I'm sure, throughout this session. We have craft of thoughts, but that, for me, that golden thread that makes it more effective is the gentleness. Gentle with yourself, gentle with others, gentle with the public, that thoughtfulness of it's strategic, but it's loving. You can make a hanky and it says something manipulative and smug and ego, and it won't work. But if you gently think about what's the language that power holder will engage with, what images do they like, how do I show that I'm seeing them as a whole human being and not just their job, or not just, the word gentle just felt so rich. I don't know, you're a wordsmith.
Well, it feels like, but it also feels like it does combine with, the period of time you've been doing this is, as we've seen, an incredible rise in a very kind of binary way of fighting each other on social media, very often with where the only outcome will be the continual kind of, radicalization of a lot of people. So it feels like that this is, running
and
beside
also,
it, trying to...
And I think there's a lot of, I used to get it early on in the media and a little bit now, but people go, oh yeah, all craftivism is gentle. I'm like, no, it isn't. There's some, it can look pretty and kitsch, but have a really hateful message on it or be really divisive. So I think for me, it was also a way to say, don't just presume because it's craft, don't presume it's all women that do it or that it's all cute, because there is some, you can do very ungentle craftivism. So I felt like it was another opportunity for people to go, well, why is it gentle craftivism and not just craftivism? It was a nice opportunity for me to say, there is a risk we could do ungentle craftivism that I think is more harmful and helpful. And if we're talking about creating physical resources, I really don't want any of it going in the bin, or for us to create more and more stuff on a finite planet. So let's be gentle and careful about this in all of these different ways. It felt like an important word to add on.
Well, you're right. So in George A. Romero's movie The Crazies, right at the start, an old woman stabs someone with both her knitting needles.
Well,
and
there you go.
that's very brutal craftivism,
exactly.
yeah.
And there is brutal craftivism out there. Just Google it.
Yeah, 1973 if you want to check on that movie. Danbee, I wanted to, so how did, in terms of you two working together on this book, how did that come, what was the first approach? So you've started talking to each other, you've kind of, you've had these conversations that initially started in Fitzrovia. That idea of now solidifying that and placing it on a page and working out how neuroscience and craftivism work. How did Sarah start that conversation?
I mean, Sarah was, from my perspective, was like already had this idea going and was just like, I just need someone who can slot in some of these neuroscience ideas. Do you think you could do that? I think you maybe sent over some bits of like project descriptions, and I was like, yeah, actually, this looks right up my alley. And also at the time, I had just graduated, I think, and I was starting to do more work as a professional science communicator, and I just thought, this will be good practice for me as well. So yeah, it all just felt, I don't know, it just made a lot of sense. And honestly, like Sarah just arrived very prepared and was just like, here, all you have to do is step into this like little empty spot that I've left for you.
But you could have challenged me at any point as well. I wasn't too much of a dictator.
No, it was very inviting. It was absolutely very inviting, very gentle. And again, because it just, there's such an alignment, and also like what I want to do with my life, it just made a lot of sense. And I'm extraordinarily pleased with how this book ended up. So yeah.
But I did meet Danbee years before the book. And, you know, Matt is still one of my patrons, a good friend, my ex-boyfriend, who was like, you two should meet. We met with him in a pub in North London, and the poor guy didn't say a word because we were just like, and, you know, the book wasn't in mind when we met. But the more I knew how passionate Danbee was about getting this information out into the public and saying to the public, this is just as flawed information as the rest of it, and all of the social injustice issues within neuroscience.
With this book, it was like, oh, cool. Here is an opportunity for me to connect neuroscience research that is, you know, some of it is older, some of it's emerging, but I can connect neuroscience very clearly, very directly, in a way that whoever's picking up this book is going to find extremely relevant.
And we've got all the citations in the back, so it is all very robust.
Yeah.
But even with the graphic novel, I'm a very visual person. I love how graphic novels can hold that nuance and those different voices visually. I love graphic novels on social change, on people's personal stories. So knowing that you did that, and Danbee's not going to say this, but you got your doctorate from MIT. So selfishly, I was also an undergrad from MIT. Selfishly, I also had in my head, how do I make this book robust and not dismissible? Saying, you know, graduated from MIT just helps, and you've got the American audience as well, not just the UK. So there was, very selfishly, I was like, this makes it harder to dismiss. And then just really useful phrases that I learned from you about the, you know, me talking about the comfort of craft to ask uncomfortable questions, and you saying, oh, well, that's because of grounding and anchoring and landmarks. I was like, what? What's all this? Like, it really made me feel less like I was, you know, delusional, and more like, oh, my gut feeling is actually right sometimes. Sometimes it's not, because we've got biases. But, you know, the language in the book is very accessible, but it is also linked in with the neuroscience of memory devices and good surprises and dopamine. And I think that's one of your massive skills. So of course I was going to be like, please do this.
You mentioned handkerchiefs before, so I know that you have, because that's one thing we've not talked about. We've been quite non-specific on what the actual end result is. So you have something in your bag, though, don't you?
I have in my little pouch new merch as well. Don't you love it? I got a hanky. It's in the book, and what I love about the book is you see this on one side and you turn over the page and you see the mess as well. Luckily my grandmother cannot see, but I wouldn't do what I do if it didn't work. And what I love about the book is we've got all these case studies as well. It's not just the theory, but it's, you know, over a decade of people taking part and me tweaking things when it doesn't work and all of that. So one of our projects, which is quite unusual, is the handkerchief project, which links in with the good surprises. So you might get a nice meal arrive from a loved one. If you're a politician or a board member or a local leader, whether it's a religious leader or a head teacher, to be hand-delivered a handmade bespoke handkerchief or receive one in the post It's quite unusual, and it is loving, hopefully. So in the corner it says all lowercase. Again, in the book we've got typography, very important, no capital letters, people. It says don't blow it, and then in brackets, please, just again for anyone who might be oversensitive when they're reading it. And then it says, so this is a fake MP, because it's a sample. It says, "Dear my MP, Dr. Alex Jones." I thought that was quite a fun generic name. Could be a man, could be a woman, could be whoever. "In your role as a politician, I wish to encourage you to use your powerful position, skills, and valuable time to help make our world a happier, healthier, and more harmonious place for all." Smiley face. "I'm sure you have a tough job with lots of demands and requests. I believe in you to not blow it," in capital letters, and then brackets saying, "hee hee," dissipating any tension. "But use this opportunistic role to help make many positive differences in our fragile world, to help it flourish. ... Yours in hope, Sarah Corbett," with a fake postcode, because if it's for a politician, you write your real postcode. And then it has flowers on it, Robin, because that links in with the flourishing. But we've had people make handkerchiefs for their MPs if they're near a beach, if they're in a constituency that's on the seaside, or if they know that their MP loves a certain football club, or we've had people make them for board members of retail companies with stuff that that board member loves. We make it as bespoke as possible, and with non-violent communication language, encouraging language. It's completely timeless, so that they can go, okay, my constituent cares, but they're also holding me account. But it is a way to encourage them, and you keep it as a physical reminder because it's not out of date. It's not saying do this now either. And for politicians particularly, it's really useful because a lot of them in the UK, they might have tiny offices in the House of Commons and in their constituency. So you don't want to give them something big that annoys them and their staff that they haven't got space for. But politicians do love showing off something that their constituents have made, because they'll show it to media and other politicians and their staff going, "Look what I received." So it's quite a sneaky way of them remembering you and that dopamine feeling, that the dopamine hit that they got when they got it from you, so they're more likely to engage with you on email or in person again and be more open-minded to what you're saying. But it is also a sneaky way of holding them account. But it's completely hand-done, so it takes a number of hours to do it. So for the maker, you're not going to stitch something you don't agree with. And I have these craft of thought questions with every project, so normally about 3, which are uncomfortable questions, like, what's my intention with this? If I was an MP receiving this, how would I feel? Would I feel manipulated or genuinely encouraged? What would this feel bespoke to me because of the images used or not? If I was a politician, how difficult is my job? What are some of the other things that I'm competing with, whether it's my personal life problems or whether it's my job? It just helps people think through being empathetic to the power holder just as much as to the people directly affected by oppression, which is really important because we can often demonize people or objectify people or just see people as a role. So for the maker, it really helps with that deep thought, mindfulness, and critical thinking. And for the receiver, we've got lots of case studies in the book of people saying how it really helped build a relationship with that local power holder and their team, because they knew that they weren't going to have a milkshake thrown at them or be disrespected. And we've got some lovely case studies in there. But I thought it's nice to physically see something, isn't it, and have a case study of it. I mean, you're not going to put that in the bin, are you, Robin?
No, and of course, also being in England, people have colds all the time, so they definitely want to keep it as well.
Yeah, it's usable. It's very functional. But it's very delicate as well. There's lots of elements there of the colours, the fonts, the delicateness, how long it takes. It's hard to put that in a tweet or a TikTok dance video, isn't it?
Well, also, sorry, Dan.
I was just going to say, I know we've been doing a lot of shout outs to dopamine today, but I just want to point out that for this project, there are a couple of other, delightful brain chemicals involved. So when you feel seen and recognized, saying like, "I'm sure your job is very difficult," and, to receive that acknowledgement, getting that acknowledgement actually also activates our production of serotonin. And serotonin, when you get enough of it, promotes pro-social behaviors like reciprocity, patience, fairness, empathy, cooperation. And then also when you feel gratitude that somebody has spent the time making something, gratitude is one of the ways that we think can activate our internal production of opioids. So yeah, I always like telling people, we can make our own drugs. We can produce opioids and cannabinoids in our own brains. And the way that we do that is through pro-social behaviors. Showing gratitude, we can produce cannabinoids by showing friendship love, having, moments of positive connection with people. So this hanky, yeah, it actually activates so many of these wonderful things that we can do for ourselves. And then that also is a gift that you're giving to someone else. Hey, I want to give you something that's actually going to heal you and is going to be good for you, and also will hopefully make you feel more willing to have an emotional connection with me, and then we can actually do something together.
And it doesn't mean as well, like I have people going, well, my MP's not going to do anything, I'm going to vote them out. I'm like, yeah, okay, so while they're still in power, this is really useful to be their critical friend, not an aggressive enemy. You can still leaflet to get them out. You can still vote against them. This isn't to replace other forms of activism. This is to see it as one tool in the toolkit to go, okay, I've got X more years with this politician. They are supposed to represent me. So as much as possible, I'm going to hold them account. I had one MP who was doing lots of stuff on female genital cutting where I lived, FGM, which I had no idea people directly affected in my constituency. I didn't know that was a thing, and she was really passionate about it. She wasn't in a political party I agreed with at all, so I always voted to get her out. But while she was in power, I worked with her and her team to get some media, to get women's institutes involved, to get her support from a local charity who would have dismissed her because they didn't agree with her general politics. But she was really powerful in the party that was in power. She was a rising star in the party. She had a lot of support behind her from party members. So I thought, well, this is really useful to make her a hanky to say, look, I'm not seeing you as, a certain person that I'm just going to shout at you as an activist and dismiss you and be disrespectful. But she wouldn't have talked to me about FGM if I hadn't given her a hanky and had a few meetings with her where she trusted me enough to say, I'm going to do stuff on this. Can we work on it a bit? And, it's about honing your craft and being strategic on, you can still vote someone out while still trying to change them from within. And I think, my mum's a politician. I think that helped me learn. She was deputy mayor and education minister, and seeing and growing up in a community where seeing that there isn't one way to do activism, one right or wrong way, and that it's messy and everything's connected, and you can boycott one company, which might be the right thing to do, but you can also buy a share in another company and do shareholder activism, and they're both needed. And we need all of those different threads in the messy world that we're in.
That reminds me of that essay by Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick, that one which has got the great subtitle, "You're so paranoid you probably think this essay is about you." And she talks about, Olivia Lang quotes it in her book Funny Weather, and she talks about the fact that we spend too much time identifying poison and not enough time seeking nourishment. And it seems a lot of what you're saying is really saying, well, you can still be against something, but find the way that you can turn it into a for. Find the way, it's like when we see on social media someone trending, and then everyone sometimes joins in being angry with, the journalist, and you go, well, just ignore the journalist altogether and put up something positive about the person that you're, it just feels that that's the...
Yeah, the first project in the book is the Dream Making project, which for me came out of doing this for years and working as an activism manager for Oxfam in different places where we always focused on the problem, which is right, we should, but it was burning everyone out. We were all in fight or flight, we were all exhausted because you just focus on the problem. So you're in that survival mode, whereas we often wouldn't talk about, well, what is that utopia vision that we want? And the neuroscience that Danbee can talk about of how actually having that dream is really important for sustainability, for our own sustainability as activists, but also to be a moth to a flame, for people to go, yeah, I want to be part of that dream, is much more important long term, and most activism takes a long time to make any change at all, if we do make change. So we need that dream to focus on. And Martin Luther King had a dream, and in the civil rights movement they talk about the beloved community, which I talk about in the book, of we need that vision to aim towards, knowing that we might never fully reach it, but that sustains us much more than just focusing on what we don't want, and it attracts more people in. It's more likely that people can join that common cause. Even if you've got other stuff you disagree on, you can still have that focus on, and that's why it was important to have it as the first project. I think it was the first project I gave you to be like, can you write some stuff up about this? Thinking, oh, yikes, what if they can't? And it was just, I think, it might have been the easiest one to do, was it?
Because I had been spending a lot of time looking through like neuroanatomy, because in neuroscience there's so much debate and argument about how to interpret neuroscience data. And for me, I was like, okay, I want to go back to the basics. What are the things that neuroscientists can actually agree on? It's the neuroanatomy, because it's like one of the few things where it's like, all right, here's the thing. It's right here in front of us. And if you look at how our human brains have evolved, there's like the spinal cord, and then there are like, we can think of it as 3 lumps. And the first 2 lumps, hindbrain and midbrain, they already take care of everything we need in order to move and sense and respond to the here and the now. And then, but if you look at a typical image of a human brain, what you're actually seeing is mostly forebrain. Like that last lump has like grown and curled around, and it's gotten so big that that's all we see. And the question is, well, why is forebrain so big? And what we believe now is forebrain is our biological simulator. So all these things that, you know, typically are thought of as cognition, like, you know, memory, perception, decision-making, all of those things actually can be thought of as they are a way of simulating, of getting away from the here and now. And this is one of my favorite technical terms from neuroscience, which is mental time travel. Yeah. Whenever we imagine, whenever we're daydreaming, whenever we are leaving behind our immediate, you know, sensations right now and thinking, oh, I would love to eat this tomorrow, or gosh, I'd really like to go out with my friends, but how will my parents react if I come home after curfew? Like,
or I would love some joyful bees in the world rather than extinct bees.
Yeah. So all of that is actually one system that allows us to do all of that. And so actually, if we think of our brain as a muscle, that is, you know, it's important to exercise our muscles to keep them strong. Using our imagination is the exercise that will keep strong all these other things that we know that we need to do to have, you know, good decision making, to have good perception, to strengthen our memory, all of that can be strengthened by exercising our imagination. So yes, so yeah, when you asked me to do that one, I was like, wow, this is perfect. Yeah. I've been wanting a soapbox to stand on to yell about this for so long.
But then you started talking about memory devices as well, because I was like, and then people keep it and then they look at it and they can remember that dream when they're worried about, you know, joyful bees is, a lot of us are worried about the bees. I have a bee tattoo. So you think about dead bees, and then what do you think of? You only think of dead bees. You don't think of how to help the bees because you're stuck in that sadness and that fear and that disempowerment. So I was like, you do a dream, and then you don't give it to a politician or put it as street art. You keep this one because you've been visualizing. The craft of thought questions in it say, whatever your dream is, what does it smell like? What does it look like? What does it sound like? You sit with your little cloud before you stitch it and go, okay, I can imagine joyful bees now. And then your brain starts figuring out how to help create the joyful bees. And what I wanted this one was, and some of the projects, is for you to keep it at home or in your office, but mostly at home, and put it somewhere that you just see daily or regularly, like our footprint kit as well. You keep that. So that, and I said to Danbee, you know, it's so that when you look at it, it might remind you of how you felt and what your craft of thought craft of thoughts you were thinking while you were making it. And, you know, that's the hope with it, and it keeps you motivated. And you were like, oh, yeah, it's like a memory device or a landmark or whatever you called it.
Mental landmark.
Mental landmark. And I was like,
that
that's
helps
a thing?
you.
Is that a thing?
Yeah, it's a thing. It helps you with the mental time travel, because whenever, you know, when you're traveling in just physical spaces, having a good landmark helps you navigate. And so, yeah, having objects around you in your environment that remind you, oh, these are my commitments, these are my dreams, these are my goals. Having these physical objects, genuinely, it makes it easier for your brain to remember, oh, right, that was that thing when I got really excited about it and I decided that I'm going to do something about it.
I decided to commit to supporting by doing a wild box on my, you know, windowsill to attract the bees, or I was going to talk to my neighbour about this thing. But also it could be, if you had a really traumatic experience doing your gentle craftivism, then you'll remember that looking at it. So I always try and mitigate the risks at the workshops or doing it on your own. Of these are hard craft of thought questions, but they're about mistakes are endearing, you're trying your best, we're all going to be flawed. But so it's always trying to mitigate those risks of people looking at their dream cloud and wincing. Like, how I'm always thinking backwards of, what's the worst thing that can happen is it goes in a landfill, or people just make it watching the telly and not thinking through the questions, or they have this traumatic experience on their own or in a group. They're not going to want to look at it. So how do we make sure it's beautiful tablecloths and instrumental music, and the questions are tough but in a loving, positive way, and all of those things, so that the mental landmark is a positive one rather than one that you want to keep in your drawer and go, oh, I'm a bit overwhelmed by the bee problem. Like, I hope people hang whatever their dream is somewhere relevant. And again, in the book, we've got lots of examples of how it's helped people commit to the issue that they care about and create conversations with family members at home or in their office. And
all of those aspects that feel intuitive to you, they're, again,
when you said it was a thing.
Neuroscience is just catching up. It's just frantically racing after people's intuitions. When you have someone who's put a lot of thought into something,
and there's evidence,
there's neuroscience,
but also that, I mean, there's loads of voices in the book from around the world of people who've taken part. So I'd see these trends in workshops and talks, and you know, when people would email me and put on social media, this is what I thought while I was doing this, and this is the response. All of that stuff, I could say, well, this is what's happening, but does this fit with the brain? And you could go, oh yeah, this does and that does, or we don't have enough evidence on that yet. But it was a real, like, it felt really good for my mental health, and that I wasn't deluding myself, because that was important, to be like, am I shoehorning something in that isn't real, or is this all biases, or is this... which was...
Except it would always be real, wasn't it? Because it would be real for your experience.
It
and
would,
that's I know it helps even more,
it
but it's
does
that
help,
bit where,
I think.
you know, you might find something that disproves, I don't actually feel like that. Hang on a minute, I do feel like that. I'm sorry.
But I think when
Doctor, your equation is wrong.
But I think when you're doing a book, and you know this,
Yeah, I do,
you don't want to just make these sweeping statements and go, well, this is true. And we all have presumptions, we all have biases, unconscious biases, and all of that I'm learning about. So I doubt everything, as you can probably tell. So I always ask those questions. So when it is confirmed, I remember you saying, like, your gut feeling is actually right. Like, it was getting emotional. I think I'm tired. It was that thing of, like, this is real. This isn't just my weird little brain saying this seems to be right. Like, this is how the brain works. This is how you talk about the gut brain and the spine brain. And, like, it's not just in your head. Like, your whole body is connected. Like, it's,
Still is just your weird little brain, though, and
It's
that makes it
also
even
my
more
weird little
exciting, I think, weird little brains.
Well, it's not just my little brain, it's
Oh,
lots
no,
of voices
there's lots of weird
other
little brains.
and there's others in the room here that are also
Nothing
weird
weirder
little
than a human brain.
gentle craftivists.
Isn't that the fun of it when it works? We've run out of time. We're going to throw it out to the audience to get some questions. But this book, I'll tell you what, Danbee, really, you're lucky, because the next question was all going to be about basically understanding the human imagination. And as we realise, that ultimately is going to be the answer to what is consciousness, and we would have been here for quite a while till everyone got Stockholm syndrome, because that's a big one. But the book it's a wonderful, ever since I first saw your work and all the things you make, and the fact that both of you combined on this, and as you said, however much joy you get when you are, as you said, given a justification that says this joy, this is real. Because for so many people, the battle with a lot of different issues, including mental health, is that people will just go, oh, well, that's just you, or that's, and I think it helps not just, people can't just sweep away, the beauty that lies within there. So, yes, this is a wonderful thing, the Craftivist Collective Handbook. And thank you, Danbee, and thank you, Sarah. And we're going to throw it open to the audience. Have we got 5 minutes?
No, we got a question.
Oh, that's good. Because do you know what? I said, show me when it's 5 minutes. I could see your watch upside down, so it worked perfectly. What would you like to ask?
You've done a really good job of explaining the kind of craft and the kind of aspect of the book. And you didn't speak much about the activism side. And I was curious whether or not actually, although it might be really enriching and healthy, I'm kind of wondering whether or not they actually do have an impact.
Yeah. Yes, and if they didn't, I wouldn't do it. I'd just do craft making gifts for people. I make weird teddies for people, so I just do that. Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons for writing the book is most of the impact is the data I collect is that qualitative rather than quantitative. I don't do feedback forms at my workshops because it can often stump people's growth when they're thinking through stuff. But I really wanted to show like this does work. And I do say at the beginning, everyone's context is different. You might be reading this in Greenland or in New Zealand. So I've got different voices from around the world, but it is very context specific. But there are case studies in there of WWF used our 10-point manifesto, which is in the book, to create their own Craftivism project that changed the law in Spain to protect migrating birds. And it was very humbling because I got an email a few weeks later from the head of campaign saying, I don't know if you know this, but we used your manifesto, we created a campaign and we won. And I immediately was like, oh, they didn't need me. And then I thought, that's brilliant. This is really good. You got the manifesto, you don't need me. There's case studies in the book of some, we got Marks and Spencer's to pay the living wage to 50,000 staff by giving the board members handkerchiefs to build a relationship with them, lots of boring meetings over a year. Then we made Christmas cards for the CEO saying, all we want for Christmas is the living wage for your lovely staff. Valentine's Day cards saying, all we want you to do is show your love this Valentine's Day for your lovely staff. And they announced they were paying the living wage to 50,000 staff just before the next AGM. We went to the AGM to say, well done. It would also be better if you were accredited living wage employers, which they're still not. But it was really interesting going from the first AGM where we gave them these bespoke handkerchiefs, all packaged up, not on a big display saying, look at us, very bespoke. Every board member had their own craftivist from across the country that looked like M&S core customer base, which was important. And the chair of some of the board found their hanky maker and said, oh my word, I loved my hanky. Others were quite dismissive, and that was just as useful data. And the chair of the board took me aside, which is very unusual. He came and found me and said it was the most powerful campaign they'd experienced because it was gentle. He didn't say the word gentle, but he said it was very respectful. But also because every time the board met, they kept saying to each other, or some of them would, because there's 14 of them, what was on your hanky? Where have you put your hanky? And then the ones that were supportive of us had their hanky as an excuse to say, well, their handwritten letters had quite a robust argument to say how this made business sense and it was financially viable, which was helpful for them. Others who dismissed it, it just kept coming up. So all of the elements in that, the chair of the board said, without your project, this wouldn't have happened. And one of the board members put their handkerchief in the private archive museum in Leeds, where the only thing that goes in the archive is what has shaped the company's history. So it's near M&S's Victoria sponge cake recipe, because apparently that was a big deal. Had no idea. So that was a very clear thing. But then also we've got voices from people saying, someone made our little mini scrolls, which are paper craft to support Fashion Revolution. you shop drop them instead of shoplift them. So you drop them in pockets that could be more ethical in shops. Completely anonymous, but my goal with that was to get as much media as possible in places that don't normally cover fast fashion. So we got it on the homepage of BBC News website, which is one of the biggest news outlets in the world, and particularly fashion magazines where fashion lovers would go. So Business of Fashion, probably the most influential within the fashion industry, covered it because we didn't name and shame brands who are their advertisers, and we said we love fashion and we want the industry to be as beautiful as the beautiful clothes. So all of those elements led to journalists saying we had one journalist who said this is the first anti-fast fashion campaign that I was able to pitch it to my editor without the editor saying our readers will feel name and shamed, we won't get advertisers in, we have beautiful images and colours. So that's a very different impact. And we had one craftivist, which is in the book, Emily Stone, who emailed me saying, I did your little fashion statements at the Barbican and I kept one in my bag. This wasn't part of my strategy. I didn't plan this one. I overthink everything. She said, I kept one in my bag, so whenever I open my bag to buy something, I question whether I should buy it or not. So for me, it's not just changing a law or a policy, it is helping Emily change her behaviour. It is about reaching media who might not normally cover something. The book is really about saying there isn't a linear, here's a recipe to do effective craftivism and it'll work, because everything's context specific and there's other elements involved. But it can work, but it is messy. So that's why we've got all these voices of different people saying how it's helped them in different ways, individually, as a group, as a charity like WWF, loads of different case studies in there. But the book is really about trying to prove that it can work, but that you can't guarantee that it'll work. But it is my way of saying, I've been doing this a while and I think it's useful for people. So here it is. And if I die under a bus tomorrow, it doesn't matter because it's all in the book. Does that answer the question?
Who else would like to ask? Yes, from the front there.
I'm really intrigued as to how you develop your ideas. Do you both work together, or are you consistently asking yourself to craft the thoughts? Or are you like brainstorming? Or I'm just really intrigued because your ideas are amazing.
Oh, thanks. Really weird. So sometimes I work a lot with different charities still. So sometimes they'll come to me and say, we've got this campaign. So the Marks and Spencers came from the CEO of Share Action, who'd read my little book of Craftivism and said that for 3 years they'd done all the traditional forms of activism to M&S to get a meeting and got nowhere, petitions, demonstrations. And then she emailed saying, this is the weirdest activism I've ever seen. Maybe you've got an idea. And I didn't come up with a brand new idea. I knew my hanky project worked well and it fitted really well. Other times, the hippie in me, this is where it is a bit woo-woo, the Canary Craftivist project. I kept having this visual of I knew I wanted to do something to reach before the world leaders met in Glasgow for COP. What was the number? 26? COP 26? COP 27? Who knows? 26, thank you. COP 26. I knew that a lot of climate action was happening at COP, which was in the autumn. And in the spring, I was like, who's doing stuff and who's doing stuff in the summer? Because really world leaders have already made their decision when they go to COP. And lots of climate groups and climate NGOs were already going to be there and I couldn't afford to be there. And I thought, I don't need to be there. What's the point when there's already brilliant stuff going on? But I knew that my gentle craftivism is a really good bridge for people who've never done activism before. Some of them are housebound, some of them are in hospices, some of them are in rural areas, extreme introverts who don't like crowds. I knew I could reach an audience that a lot of climate groups couldn't, and also apolitical people or people who are many different political persuasions. I welcome them all in who care about the climate. So I kept thinking, the way I was thinking was, how do I engage them in the summer? In the summer, local media are desperate for media and there often isn't a lot of stuff around. Politicians and their staff read the local papers, often more than local constituents, to get a litmus test of what's happening and what are people going to vote for or not. And it's the summer, so there wasn't a lot going on. And I thought, there's no climate actions here. And then the weird hippie thing was I kept visualizing canaries, and I thought, I don't want people doing dead canaries, doing a die-in of canaries. So I kept sort of dismissing it, but I couldn't come up with another idea. So I thought, okay, well, we'll get people to make lively looking, real sized canaries, and they'll dress as canaries. We'll have flocks of people in their local constituency, somewhere that people of all political persuasions love. So quite a non-political location. So in Folkestone by the beach, there's a lovely mermaid statue. In Norwich, there's a hill overlooking the city. In Nottingham Forest, we had a flock. So I sort of used that idea of how to reach anxious people who've never done climate action before, how to reach the media in a visual way in the summer, how to get small groups together, how to make gifts for politicians that are positive and not dead things. And it kept coming back to the canary image, even though I kept sort of dismissing it. So sometimes it feels like a weird little, it's not my idea. And then other times, like the jigsaw puzzle idea was very pragmatic of, I keep talking about, people keep saying, I'm so overwhelmed, what can little old me do? And I kept using the metaphor, which I've got as a tattoo, about we're all a piece of the puzzle. If you don't do anything, there's a gap in that puzzle, but you're not the entire puzzle. And when I was working with First Save the Children, there was a very complex campaign, and I thought the jigsaw puzzle really worked for that. So they all sort of come in from different angles, but I'm always starting with the issue, what are the strengths in craftivism, who are the audiences we're trying to reach, who are the decision makers, and the craft always comes at the end. And a lot of time when people contact me, probably about 60 or over %, I say, I don't think craft's the first thing for you to do. I think you should have a conversation with that person, your neighbour, about who said something xenophobic. Don't cross-stitch them something yet. Maybe have a conversation with them. Maybe, ask. I had one person who contacted me saying, I want to do a craftivism project because our local library is not disabled access. And I said, okay, well, have you asked them why? Because that's against the law. And they said, no. I said, before you do your craftivism, just ask them. And they emailed back saying, oh yeah, they're fixing it next week. It's just that they had some building work to do. And I said, yeah, but they should have put up a sign saying, we are accessible normally. So I was like, they didn't need craftivism there. But I think with the book took 2 years rather than one, because I wanted to hold all of those elements of this isn't a recipe book, go do it and it'll work anywhere. Think through all of those different elements, but also don't get overwhelmed and do nothing. And be honest about the strengths and the weaknesses as well. Craftivism, sadly, isn't going to change the world on its own, but it is a useful tool in the toolkit. But yeah, I have no easy answer for that brilliant question, sorry.
Does anyone else like to ask anything? Right, can I just check, have we covered everything on the back of your hand?
You could see it, I knew you could see it.
I love the fact you thought you'd used invisible ink. Here you are.
No, I thought you couldn't read my awful left-handed writing. We've got crafter thoughts.
Yeah, I've done the crafter thoughts, yeah.
We didn't talk about the neuroscience of people in groups.
Should
we do a little bit of that?
Well, that might still get
Got
you off having to
hanky
explain
and the
human
dream.
imagination from a neuroscientific perspective. So yeah, that is a very interesting part of the book. So the difference where, I think one of the beautiful things about craftivism is, as you said, for some people who really find groups very, very difficult, you are still giving them a way of communicating. But how does it change, Danbee, then when you're working in a group?
Well, I think we actually did touch on it a tiny bit when I was going off about cannabinoids. But
Everyone went off into a totally different place at that point. They really focused on one element of that conversation.
So positive, like real world interactions with people you feel safe around or people that you feel like you share values, some form of, meaningful connection that will increase production of cannabinoids in your own body, in your brain, and that right now it's definitely, even by my standards, emerging research of what exactly this does, but there is a lot of, hopeful results coming out as to, the ways that this can be beneficial to us. But also, I think it all harkens back to, and this is something I feel like I heard from like a young age in every science class, humans are social creatures. And I was always just like, okay, cool. What does that mean? And I think it's really only recently that I realized that positive social interactions, like real world interactions, there's something to be said about digital interactions and how that, yes, that can increase your reach, but something about being physically in a space with each other.
It's multisensory.
Exactly, it's multisensory, and it's something about that does generate a lot of benefits at a molecular level. This is still something that is challenging to study, and this, for me, is like, if there are any chemists or physicists out there who want to help, we need better imaging tools, because a lot of times these studying these phenomena from a neuroscience perspective, it's challenging because we don't have quite the tools to let us do it in the context. And you've been talking over and over about how important context is. That's also so true of neuroscience. We're becoming so keenly aware of how much our context, our social context, our, like, can we meet our basic needs? What is our social political position relative to others? How much access do we have to information and to play? All of these things have a huge impact on how our nervous systems grow and develop. And so, yeah, if we aren't able as a scientific research community, if we cannot take all of that into account very explicitly in the way that we design our experiments, in the way that we collect data, in the way that we analyze data, right now we are extremely limited in our ability to do that.
But there's a lot of clinicians now. There's a book that's just come out called Intelligent Hands that I really recommend, not just because I'm in it, but that as well. But loads of clinicians, not neuroscientists, saying how crafting as groups with that lack of eye contact makes people feel like they're in a communal environment, but without having to give eye contact, which when you think of it, I remember joining activist groups, and normally they're in an anarchist cafe somewhere where you're in the back corner because you get a free venue and it's cold and it's ugly looking, and you're just there to go, are we going to do a demo next week? Let's quickly do it and head off. And I always had that in the back of my mind of, I don't feel safe here actually. I don't feel calm. I'm having to give eye contact to people, and what if I disagree with them? So I'm going to look at the table. And as an introvert, I don't react straight away to people. I need to reflect and then say what I think. And I was getting people saying, oh, why are you even here? You never talk. Do you even care about the issue? And I thought, I care so deeply about this issue, which is why I'm here, because I don't feel safe here. I don't feel welcomed, or it is a cold space and it's an ugly space, and I could easily stay at home, and you're giving me a cup of tea, if that, but nothing else to use with my hands, and I have to give loads of eye contact to people I don't know. And if I disagree with people, I don't want to look at them in the eye. Like it never felt like a calm space to really do that critical thinking, feel like we're doing something together. It was always felt like you're doing the demo, you're doing the media bit, you're doing this. Whereas when I went to craft groups, I thought, oh my word, this is slow. There's normally a cup of tea and a biscuit. There's normally a tablecloth. It's calmer imagery. It's not all black and red and capital letters. So knowing those two worlds, I was like, I can learn from the craft stuff to bring into the activism that helps with, you can listen to people you disagree with while you're crafting and go, oh, tell me a bit more about that, without having to look at them, because you're not seen as rude because you've got an excuse of using your hands, and you're not sitting there freaked out because you're doing something repetitive. So I'd read a lot from clinicians and some psychologists saying the power of craft for the comfort, for solidarity and to do stuff. But we talked about, well, how does this fit in with the brain?
Well, so a lot of that data from clinicians, from people actually experiencing these activities, that's still incredibly valuable data. And I just want to take another moment to emphasize qualitative data is actually also still quantitative.
Okay.
Yeah, it's still just as valuable, just as insightful, just as important. And I think that is something, so for me, like a lot of the projects I get involved with, usually it stems from me wanting to push back on something that the research community has decided to dismiss. And that's, in the ivory tower of academia, that's their realm of power. And so I don't have much of a voice there. But if I can come and connect with someone like Sarah, work on projects like this, then I suddenly have a platform where I can say, look, actually, all of you people who are looking for data, here is a whole book of data that can show over many, many instances across many different contexts, like the replicability of found in this book is hard to find in a lot of scientific papers and a lot of scientific experiments. They don't have the same level of replicability that you actually have in this one book across so many different contexts with so many different people. So for me, that is actually incredibly powerful.
And similarly, I can say to activist groups and charities, using these lovely gold stalk scissors is not a luxury. It makes sense in terms of people feeling valued, feeling that it's special, want to join in, having the tablecloths, having the scents that we have, having the craft, having the playlists in the book. All of that isn't a lovely add-on, and it's not just for fun. Like, this is, again, to serve the cause. We have music to serve the cause. We have a music psychologist in the book from Westminster University who's checked the playlist so that it doesn't distract from your craft of thoughts. It enhances your craft of thoughts. All of that stuff is all, how can we help people be the most effective craftivists and activists and serve the cause and limit polarization and division? And so all of this looks very cute and nice, but it's like, Danbee says it's useful as well. I know you got a question over there.
Oh, yeah, question.
About, as you were talking about sort of eye contact and doing stuff with your hands, is there anything in neuroscience about how craftivism and neurodivergence would go together, and whether craftivism would be a particularly useful way of engaging for perhaps some neurodivergent people?
I will confess, I don't know that literature very well. I highly suspect yes, absolutely. This is another area that I am angry about, which is neurodivergence is often dismissed as too messy, too complicated to study. And so it really has taken a lot of small pockets of voices of people who are determined to show that and to get people to understand that having a social justice orientation in neuroscience isn't a lovely add-on. It is critical to doing our work well and to honor the duty of care that I believe neuroscientists have. We've been given the privilege of access to information. We've been given time and freedom to study these things. And these are exactly the questions that we should be answering. But oftentimes, there's a whole system there of pressures of funding. There's all kinds of politics within science as well. And so I think the more we can make it clear to the research community, people really want to know this. This is actually incredibly relevant, and it's not something to be dismissed. And if it's hard, well, then we just need to figure out how to deal with that, because no one else is going to do it. And that is our duty of care back to society. So yes, I'm sorry that I don't have a better answer than that.
And anecdotally, I mean, obviously neurodiversity is very diverse as well, and all lots of unique people in there. Anecdotally, little things like I did a very big drop-in session in the People's History Museum in Manchester, and they are brilliant at working with neurodiverse communities. And I said, look, it's quite multi-sensory. We've got the room spray, we've got the music, we've got the flowers on the table. this all okay? And I'd always think through that as well, and I knew the room spray we were using was all natural ingredients, so that there was no synthetic ingredients that can spark, can flare people off in different ways. What I love about the workshops, whether it's a drop-in in the British Museum for hundreds of people of all over the world of different languages, or whether it's a closed group of just 12 people, is as long as you've got all the tools for people, they then use it how they want. So I have noticed people often come on their own to a lot of my events, or will email me beforehand saying, I can't deal with this, this and this. Are you okay if I put my headphones on? Are you okay if I just do that? And I love how craft is really good for people can just stroke their thread in the corner. People don't have to engage with the group at all, because they can just sit and listen and craft, or block everyone off and just see it as their little world. And no one judges each other. And the fact that there's no negative surprises, it's not loud, it's slow, it's not reactive, it's proactive. But there is stuff as well about if you've learned loads one day, like the hope is that you have it, tonight when you're asleep, is some connections happen where you're like, okay, they've just said all of these things to us, and your brain might be going, okay, what's all of this information? You sleep on it, and then tomorrow you might go, I wish I asked that question, because that's when you've consolidated. And the same with like idea generation. There's that brilliant book about how you absorb as much as you can around something, and then you sleep on it, and then normally your best idea is the next day, and it's not the first idea, it might be the third idea, but you get all that information, which is messy. And what I love about Craftivism is often at the end of a workshop, people go, I'm still figuring it out, but I've definitely learned and thought about all of these things, and I can go home, sleep on it, carry on with your kit, doing it the next day, just let it absorb, let the neural pathways connect, let the dots connect, and then you'll see what comes out of it. But that's what I get frustrated a lot with activism meetings or activism, is we go straight into the response rather than, what's this issue? How complex is it? Who are the decision makers? I grew up in a vicarage in Everton where most of the local activism meetings were in our kitchen with people smoking like troopers and swearing lots. And all I heard, because I was a curious, shy person, so I'd be drawing on a bit of paper on the floor, listening to all these activism meetings on local, national and global issues. And people would say, we targeted the wrong decision makers, it needs to be someone else, or this is more complex than we thought. This power holder is linked to the issue in this way, and if we get this person is influenced by that person, so if we get them on board with the campaign, we can get this in the House of Lords, and we can get local media for that. And it was so messy, but you needed that time over a cup of tea and a fag in the 80s to go, let's look at this messiness and figure out where we can be of use. And what I love about Craftivism is you can say, there isn't a silver bullet. Activism isn't, you're the goodie, you're the baddie. We need to go beyond the binaries, delve into the nuance of complexities of social change, and then see where we can be of best use. And I love that the craft helps you stick with that and go, this is messy, but we're going to try and figure it out.
Would anyone else like to ask anything? But we've got a question there and a question there, question there.
Sure. Just on the point of, I guess the gentle aspects of gentle activism. I guess the antithesis of throwing a milkshake at your MP, or something in your face. Is that sometimes counterproductive, or is there a place for both? Like, is there a place where you're perfectly fine to throw a brick through a window, or I know you're not advocating that this be a replacement for forms of activism. This is a part of a larger ecosystem, but I'm just wondering, that what we see in the media is largely people doing outlandish things to get a voice, but like sometimes it just gets drowned out by everything else.
I think it's a great question. I think it is, for me, it should be a last resort. So you try the gentle approach. If that doesn't work, you look for other ways. And I always talk about that jigsaw puzzle. So I'm always thinking, on an issue, what are other activists doing? Is it helpful? Is it harmful? Where can our work complement and strengthen some of it? within the charity sector, you know, you'll have Greenpeace doing their big media stunts, and they're brilliant at that. And I've done lovely workshops with their creative team where we've talked about what you're saying is we need those big stunts, but often they will do that and tell another charity like Friends of the Earth, say, we're going to do this, we know we're going to piss off the CEO and their team in this particular company. I can imagine, you know, whether it's Shell or BP or whatever, we're going to do this thing. They're not going to talk to us because it's a bad surprise and all of those reasons, but we're going to tell you because then you can say, I know you're not going to talk to them, but you could talk to us. I'm doing a talk with Helen Pankhurst on Friday in Manchester where we will discuss that in more detail, because you've got the suffragettes and the suffragists. So there was about 50,000 suffragists, about 5,000 suffragettes. The suffragists were doing a lot behind the scenes, a lot with politicians to say we need this. They do their big massive marches. At the back of their giant march, there would be suffragettes doing the smashing the windows, the slashing the artwork. Often the suffragettes and the suffragists were working together, were telling each other what each other were doing. Some of the activists would say that they were both. One day I'm a suffragette, one day I'm a suffragist. But for me, it should be the minority is doing the extreme stuff and the majority are always trying to aim with something respectful, something where people listen. Because if you throw a milkshake at someone, even if they agree with you or want to engage with you, they're in that fight, flight or freeze mode and all of that stuff. But I would say you normally need both, but the minority is the hard stuff, rather than what we get in the media a lot, and we have over the decades of how do you do activism? You throw a milkshake at someone. That milkshake can be a catalyst for loads of other activist groups to then have a conversation with that person, and we don't hear those stories. But it's always starting from the how can we not do that? But like Danbee said, sometimes they're not going to listen. And by doing that, as long as you don't murder someone, and, you know, suffragettes were seen as terrorists and some of the stuff, you know, they wanted to burn buildings that had people in, like it was very extreme stuff. But without those 5,000 minority, would we have got the change? And there's still always going to be debate about that. So I think it's always looking at it holistically of that jigsaw puzzle of what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, where can we always be as respectful as possible, but sometimes you can't. And then also when to give up and do something else, or you can't get hold of that power holder, well, who else can you engage with? I did one campaign where we kept having a blocker where the head of the department just wouldn't get anywhere with us, and I couldn't figure out why, so I had to find out what made him tick, what were his motives, and then get someone that he really admired to say, why aren't you doing this? Because he wasn't going to listen to me, but he listened to this other person, which is annoying. But it was really, and that was the person I didn't agree with on lots of issues, but for that particular issue, I was like, right, we will work with you on that. But it's a really important thing, and I would say always start with trying not to give the bad surprises, but sometimes, sadly, you do need that. But as long as it's got more people around it doing good surprises, I think that's a good strategy.
Isn't it a slightly different function though? Because I think it is highlighting. Firstly, a lot of those big things are people going, oh my God, I didn't know this person dodged this amount of tax or whatever. And then the other group of people go, right, we're going to start making these handkerchiefs or whatever.
It's a catalyst for that change, exactly. And the media want the big images. I remember when there was all of the camps in the banking district in the UK, there was about 20 photojournalists next to one teenage boy egging him on to throw a brick through a window because they wanted that one shot. You look, if the cameras turned round, they would see 80 tents, peaceful protests, songs, people talking really thoughtful about extreme capitalism, not saying we want, you know, something unrealistic, but saying we really want to curb this extreme capitalism. And they focused on one teenager. So, you know, and you're always going to get that sometimes. But I think, we've got a lot of my work is saying to people, activism, you might think it's only what you see in the media or the mainstream, but there's loads more going on behind the scenes, and you can get involved behind the scenes. You don't have to be that one smashing that window. But it's not black and white. It's not an easy answer, but
Right, well, let's we'll draw it to a close, and as you can see back there, some of Sarah's.
I didn't tell
beautiful-
him to be like sell, sell, sell.
No, but
you
you've
don't
got
have
it.
to, you
That
could
is.
just go and get
We're
the
not
free
having a book
stickers.
event to go. As you know, the book event. You've heard everything you need to know about the book. I wouldn't bother buying it. You know, it's a book event. Your stuff is great. People want to, so let's say there it is, and let's enjoy it, and do take a look at it. So, Danbee, Sarah, thank you very much. You ever saw how hard sell Grace Petrie does, and she's officially a socialist and everything.
Just get the free stickers. I'll put some music on so it's not awkward silent.